What is up, everyone? Welcome to the first edition of the Superdraft Breakdown Show, as I'm calling it. I don't know what the name is going to be in the future, but that is what we're going with right now. Superdraft, an exciting new daily newish. It's been around for a year and a half. I don't know. Time is all relative during Corona, but it's been around for a little bit. Now we are going to be offering a bunch of content for it. So this is the first breakdown we have. Going to be breaking down today's NBA slate. If you haven't signed up for it yet, go ahead and get signed up. Use the promo code Grinders. You get a nice $50 instant deposit bonus. That's just free money. You play through it once and it's yours to do whatever you want with it. You can go buy yourself a nice new Taco Bell value meal, or if you do well, you can buy many Taco Bell value meals. I don't know. The money is yours to do with what you please, but 50% instant deposit bonus using the promo code Grinder, plus a 50% match of your first deposit up to $500. Not only that, they are running a contest. If you haven't heard, they have partnered with Caesars Entertainment. That's the same Caesars that brought you Caesars Palace in Las Vegas, or Caesar Place if you watch The Hangover. That's a reference for you guys right there. But partners with Caesars Entertainment, tons of hotels all the way across the U.S., tons of resorts, going to be offering a whole bunch of free rolls, this and that, all sorts of stuff. But one of the main things, if you sign up through the Grinders Week, is going to be a prize through a raffle of 100,000 Caesars rewards credits. That is equal to $1,000 worth of free stuff, whatever you want to use, rooms, alcohol, food, whatever, at any Caesars resort, up to $1,000. So get in on that raffle. But if you guys haven't heard of Superdraft, I'm going to tell you all you need to know for tonight's slate, all you need to know for the future, everything that you could possibly have to do for tonight's NBA slate. Going to be a potential overlay in there. Currently got a $65,000 competition for tonight. So tons of prizes, tons of competitions on there, including this weekend for the Super Bowl, a $1 million competition, 267 potential entries, $4,000 per entry. I'm going to be maxing out, but they have a $20 entry. They have a $4 entry. They have a $1 entry, 50, everything from A to Z, $1 to 4,000. So get over there. Whatever your bankroll might be, you can put it on the line on Superdraft for the Super Bowl with some nice overlay likely in this competition this weekend. But we got the big game here. We got Kansas City versus the Bucks. Stay tuned for that. Tonight, we're breaking down basketball. So now I'm going to give you a quick breakdown on what Superdraft format actually is. You can play anyone you want. You can play no salary cap. It's all based on multipliers. Create a lineup of 3 guards, 3 forwards, 1 center. That's all you need to do. Throw in anyone you want. Doesn't matter. They all have a multiplier. We look here on the screen, and this is a little spreadsheet that I've created using the RG projections. But essentially right here, you have lineup position, point guard, shooting guard, doesn't matter. It's 3 of any guards. Forward, small forward, power forward, doesn't matter. Any forward position, but you only get 1 center. And some guys have multiple position eligibility. We look at Sabonis right here. He has both center and forward eligibility, so you can use them in either one of those. Gets a little bit of strategy there because you can swap out. If you have a guy in the late game like last night, which absolutely crushed and destroyed me for a little bit until they refunded all my losses from last night because of the cancellation. So great job there, Superdraft. Way to treat your customers well. But you get 3 of each position, both forward and guard, and 1 center, and everyone's based on a multiplier. So right here, Damian Lillard, 1.2 multiplier. That means if he ends up with 60 points based on their scoring system, which is similar to a mix of both FanDuel and DraftKings, 3 points for both a block and a steal, minus 1 point for a turnover, 3.5 points for the 3-pointer, 1 point per point for a real life point, and then everything else follows DraftKings. So a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B based on the point system that you're used to on FanDuel and DraftKings. Lots of potential here, triple-double bonus, double-double bonus. But we look at Damian Lillard there, so whatever he ends up with, they multiply that times 1.2 points. Really, or 1.2x. Really simple there. And S Cantor, 1.85. So if he ended up with 30 points, 30 times 1.85, whatever that is, 52, then that's what he ends up scoring there. So it's every single person has a multiplier. You can throw in anyone you want, which makes late swap really easy. That's the nice part about this. You don't have to worry about what 2v2 swap I can do. If there's a direct pivot, because every single person in every single game at the same position is a direct pivot. So that's basically it. It's real simple. You can put anyone you want, play whoever you want. More flexibility than I've ever seen on any site for years into the fantasy industry. But we're going to break down this. We'll start off by doing real simple. The one center position, you only get one. That's all you can play. So we're going to pull up the spreadsheet here. We're going to put in all the center possible guys. So we look, it's not a huge slate, only a 6-game slate. So these are the guys that are getting any projection over on the RG projections. We look at this page here. You can only play one of these guys unless you're playing Sabonis, Plumlee, Turner, and the guys with multiple position eligibility, but you can only play one guy at the center position. The thing that immediately stands out, which he's chalky almost every single night, he's on the slate because the multiplier has not changed and doesn't change too drastically from game to game. So 1.85x, that means that he is going to, whatever he ends up getting, multiplied by 1.85. And it's fairly similar to DraftKings scoring. So we look at the RG projections. In the RG projections, his projection is 166 times or divide by 1.85. So I already did the math here. This is his projection based on the multiplier of his median, his floor, and his ceiling. And we immediately see that the next closest guy is Sabonis at 56 when Cantor is at 66. Cantor is likely to come in at 70% ownership. So in cash, you 100% need to have him. Like in all likelihood, there are very few scenarios where he doesn't end up making value. Last night happened to be one of those scenarios because the complete and total blowout, but it's a matchup versus Washington. Washington, Portland, going to be one of the highest scoring games we've seen in a while. Line was at 240 last night. It's probably higher now. I haven't checked it in a little bit. I already bet it at 240. So it's a huge number here. He's expected to score a decent amount of points. 66 is currently what we have him pegged at. The next closest, again, Sabonis, 56. That's the median outcome. It's going to happen around, he's going to hit that number or over 50% of the time. Now, in order to kind of figure out if you want to fade Cantor, because it's a very interesting situation here, like there's not too many times where you see a guy with this median projection. The next closest ceiling projection is 70 with Sabonis. That means his 20th or 10th percentile outcome, or 80th or 90th, like 20% of the time, he's going to end up with 70 or more points. Whereas Cantor's going to end up with 66 or more points 50% of the time. So at the center position, it's tough. The only guys that really have a shot at beating him, if he ends up with just a mediocre game, are going to be Sabonis, Gobert, Plumlee, and Miles Turner. Everyone else, like Gorgie Jang, Tice, Jordan, like they have to have an absolute smash game in order to hit. So for the center position, you generally want to stick with one of these guys. And if you just lock in Cantor completely, it's not a bad strategy. I've done it on a fairly consistent basis, knowing that I can play multiple of these other guys that have a chance of beating him at the forward position. Creates a little bit of positional scarcity at center so that there's not going to be too many lineups with Cantor in it and none of these other guys. So it's basically swapping Cantor for one of these guys. Doesn't really seem worth it to me. You have a 101 point ceiling. He can absolutely put up 55 points in any given game. So Cantor is by far my favorite play, but any one of these three guys are guys that you can swap over to. It is the first game of the night. So if you do have Gobert, and it ends up being a spot where Cantor went off for 70 points for Superdraft, then I might suggest swapping over to Plumlee, who, if he doesn't get into foul trouble, still has the potential to get quite a few points, quite a few blocks, quite a few assists, and end up with this over 70-point ceiling. So either Gobert or Plumlee are fine. You can do it multiple different ways. Easy swap because, again, doesn't matter salary. Everyone's a direct pivot. But center, that's basically what we got going here. Cantor is pretty much a lock and load. But any one of these other three guys, in my opinion, are worth a shot in the GPPs that are fairly top heavy. All right, next up, let's look at forward here. So again, multi-positional eligibility. So we pop all these guys that have a possibility of putting in at the forward position, throw it up here, and boom, the guy that immediately stands off the page, Jeremy Grant. Jeremy Grant has a 1.65x multiplier. That's why it pops up the page. We know that he hasn't done well in recent games. I had a boatload of him last night. He came in at 50% ownership on a bigger slate, so we can probably project him for around 60 to 70% ownership on tonight's slate. It makes entire sense. His floor is 33. His median is 56, according to RG projections, and his ceiling is 86. Like, he's got a sky high ceiling. The guy can put up 60 fantasy points in any given spot. I know he hasn't been putting up a ton of volume recently, but has the ability to shoot the ball 20 times over the course of the game, maybe even more. And he can put up all the other stocks, assists, rebounds, and contribute everywhere. So Jeremy Grant going to be the chalkiest guy on the slate, probably the first forward you put in 4 cash games, and he should end up paying value. It's just all the ownership play, whether you want to play him or not, go with the field over. But my guess for his ownership is right around 60%. Next up, we got Jaylen Brown, Sabonis, George. These are the guys that I think might be better tournament plays. George is, I think, going to get the lower amount of ownership between these 3 guys. Sabonis, because of his center and power forward eligibility, generally comes in at around a 30 to 50% ownership. I think it's going to be the same tonight on a smaller slate, potentially higher. But he's at 1.2x. Again, more of a cash game guy that we go with. Offers you more of a floor than a ceiling at this 1.2x multiplier. Same thing with Jaylen Brown and Tatum here. Both these guys offer you more of a floor. They're right in the 40 to 50 point range in terms of actual points prior to the multiplier. So 1.35 and 1.2x is generally where they're going to be. We look at their ceilings, 80 and 78. That's about right with the multiplier. The interesting one here, the best tournament play, I think, in this little range is Paul George. They're going up against Brooklyn. Brooklyn so far has had the best offensive rating since they acquired Harden in NBA history and the worst defensive rating. They're going at a high pace. They're terrible defensively. Paul George has a chance for a massive game. So does Kawhi, but again, 1.1 times the multiplier. So not as much of a ceiling, considering both these guys can end up with about the same amount of points. Like, both of their ceilings are fairly similar. So these 2 guys are ones that you can use for tournaments, but I like the extra multiplier on him. Multiplier is always something you want to be aware with. After that, for forward, Durant, not getting a ton of ceiling there at 1.15 multiplier. He's going to probably end up with about 50 points. If he ends up with 50 points, that ends up being 57 after the multiplier. So not really a guy you want to go with, but the interesting part is this next tier. So we got Gary Trent Jr. I know that there's some potential guys that might be out. Little might be out. We don't know. It's the first game on the slate, so pay attention, or second game on the slate. Pay attention to the news for the Portland Trailblazers, because, again, fantastic matchup versus Washington. If Trent's in and he's starting, then has potential to put up 19 shot attempts, but we don't know who's going to be starting because we're still waiting on injury news. But the 1.75 multiplier, especially with the 3 point or the extra 0.5 points for a 3-pointer, which he shoots a lot of them every single game, gives you a bit of upside here with Gary Trent. Currently, we have his upside, his ceiling projection as the 5th most on the entire slate. And 1.75 just makes his ceiling even higher, because in his 5 percentile outcome, where he makes nearly all his 3-pointers and he keeps chucking, is a spot where he could end up with 100 points realistically at a 5% chance. Plumlee, again, foul trouble if he stays out of it. Matchup versus Gobert is tough, but he has a 1.9x multiplier. Tillman, Valanciunas has already been ruled out. Tillman should be in for a decent amount of minutes, especially with the matchup going up against Indy with Sabonis and Miles Turner in the game. Miles Turner, easy matchup versus Memphis without all their big guys, without Jackson, without Valanciunas, means that he's probably going to have a good matchup here. And we've seen upside of 50+ points from him before the multiplier in multiple different scenarios. Keep looking on down the list. Clark offers a bit of upside at 1.6, but I would hope that the multiplier would be higher. Lamb and Holiday both getting a decent amount of minutes with the injuries to Warren, with Oladipo leaving and LeVert being out. They have a decent chance at minutes, and they can always do something with them. We look at their ceilings. Holiday's at 50, doesn't offer you a ton, but Lamb is at 70. Median outcomes are fairly similar, but Lamb is the guy that offers you a whole lot more upside. Kyle Anderson was on the winning lineup last night. Not a guy that I like playing. 1.7x is a good multiplier too. So last night he ended up with 62 points, I believe, over on Superdraft at 1.7 times or 1.75x multiplier, and just at 0.5% because people don't want to play him. Other guys you can look at, Wiggins 1.4, not a great one, but still a guy that offers some upside. Oubre offers some upside. Batum might miss, but we look at his ceiling projection here, according to RG projections. There is games where he ends up chucking the ball a whole lot in a fast-paced matchup versus Brooklyn. Offers you that scenario. So we look at his ceiling. He's definitely a little bit more in play for tournaments than he is for cash or anything else, because he does offer you that upside if he ends up playing. So be on the lookout for injury news. We keep looking down at the rest of the forward position, not really seeing a ton of upside, not really seeing a bunch of median projections, and not seeing a huge floor on any of these guys. Not going to argue with guys like Looney. He may end up with 30 minutes without Wiseman tonight at a 2x multiplier. He always has a chance to get a few blocks and steals, which, again, blocks and steals worth 3 points. So if he lucks into an extra 2, 3, 4 blocks or steals, 4 blocks and steals at a 2x multiplier goes from 12 points to 24 points. So that shows you the volatility with the 2x multiplier and the blocks and steals being worth 3. Other guys, Jackson, he ends up chucking, again, at 1.75, every 3-point made is going to be closer to 6 points than the 3 points we see on the other side. Not really seeing anyone else I love here. Like, this is just my opinion. This is just what I plan on doing. But all these guys are basically in there as just, if you really want low ownership and just get an aberration of a game, that's how when you throw these guys in there. I'm not saying it's guaranteed not to happen. Injuries can happen. Any number of different things can happen. They can shoot lights out. They can get a bunch of blocks or steals randomly. But most of these guys are only going to end up in the winning lineup based on variance. And if you're playing a guy like Jeff Green or Carmelo or Robert Williams, you have to realize that you're sacrificing guys that have a pretty massive floor, pretty massive median and outcome, and Jeremy Grant and Jaylen Brown and Sabonis and Paul George. And the chances of all these guys not hitting and that guy actually hitting way above it are not great. So ownership is a thing, and it is something to keep in mind. But realistically, I'm mostly staying in this range of these guys right here. All right, last up, let's pull up guards before we break down last night's tournament and who won that, what the winning lineup was, and who kind of sealed the deal for them. But we're looking at point guard right now. Guy that immediately jumps off the page, Lillard. Lillard has been on an absolute tear, 1.2 multiplier. Not the greatest in the world, but far, far too high considering what he should be is a one-time multiplier. So we see this. We see his median outcome is 67 points. That's the second highest or the highest on the slate, right next to Cantor there. He's going to come in at 70% ownership, 60% ownership, and his ceiling, 93 points here. So we look at the rest of the guy's ceiling. There's a few 80s in here, 178, and then everyone else is 70 below. So outside these top 5 guys, this median projection is pretty much the same or higher than everyone else. Like, these guys are in the 80s. Everyone else is in the 70s, the 60s, the 50s, based on their multiplier at the guard position. So, again, you can decide to fade Lillard, play any of these other guys, but more likely than not, especially with them getting a little bit of rest and the fantastic matchup versus Washington, Lillard is probably going to be in the winning lineup one way or the other. It's just likely to happen. Again, if you want to plan on eating the chalk with both Lillard and Cantor, my suggestion is bringing it back with Westbrook here, who offers the second highest median projection, second highest ceiling on the slate at 1.25. Portland, second worst defensive team, I think, in all of basketball, maybe third, and one of the higher pace teams in all of basketball. So for fantasy, it's one of the best matchups on the board. The only potential better matchup is Brooklyn or Washington. We're both on the slate, so keep that in mind. But then we get to the next tier. Again, Jaylen Brown, Tatum, we talked about both of them. We know what their ceiling, what their median is. Both of them are very much in play. Curry, we know that in any given matchup, he can go for 70 fantasy points. That's before the multiplier, which at 1.2, 70 fantasy points is going to actually get you 84, which we see his ceiling is 81 right now. So makes sense here. Everything adds up. Brogdon been putting up consistently 40 fantasy points over on Superdraft, 40 to 50. And we see that 1.25x multiplier. So 40 fantasy point outing on average would get you 53, roughly 50 to 53. So we see that he has a little bit of upside. If he ends up with 56 points or 52 points, then he ends up at a ceiling game of 69. Mitchell, another guy that can absolutely chuck and go crazy. 1.35x multiplier. Conley, Trent, we already talked about. Clarkson's the interesting one. So we see the ceiling projections over here, and him and Gary Trent Jr. both have the highest ceiling projections in this little range right here. So it's because both of them are shooters. Both of them like to shoot 3 balls. So, and both of them can eat up a lot of usage, get a few steals and blocks that'll help them out greatly with that 3 point per block and steal. So these guys' ceiling is a bit higher than a lot of these other guys in this range who have a lower multiplier compared to their 1.7 and 1.75x. So these guys make great tournament plays on any given night, and guys that I can use. Morant, we saw him put up 60-point outings before a multiplier earlier on the season, kind of come back to earth. Last night didn't get a ton of run because of the blowout, so he might be a little bit more rested, but a little bit more of an unknown. Then we see guys like Beal, Harden, Kyrie with really small multipliers. We know Harden and Kyrie kind of are at that multiplier spot because of the fact that if Durant's out, then both those guys get a huge uptick, huge potential ceiling. But at this current multiplier, I don't really plan on playing them too much. Yes, Beal can go for 70 actual points, but the likelihood of it isn't great. He's probably going to end up in the 50-point range. So I'm not going to argue with it in a spot for tournaments because he can if a lot of these other guys fail, but he's not the optimal guy to use. So I plan on fading him tonight in tournaments. Might have a few shares, but wouldn't surprise me if I had 0 shares in Beal in this tournament. Next range, we got DeLon Wright, put up a big night last night. Or the other night, put up 50 going up against whoever. So at a 1.8x multiplier, he definitely offers some ceiling. We don't have it in the RG projections because as a high ceiling, because there is Rose back in the offense, Blake Griffin's back in the offense, and Jeremy Grant takes up a bunch of usage. So the reason for his lower ceiling projection, his 20th percent or 80th percent outcome is going to be 54 points, but he does have a 95% outcome of like 80 would be my guess, because he can put up a 40-point game. He can take up a bunch of usage. He can play a bunch of minutes. So be on the lookout in case Rose for some reason gets ruled out or Griffin for some reason gets ruled out later on in the day. But that's basically where we're at. Like all these other guys, Little, if he ends up playing, would be the other guy to look at. 60-point projected ceiling. He went crazy last night. He got the start. He might not play in this matchup. If he doesn't play again, uptick to Gary Trent Jr., upgrade to any of these other guys. Outside of that, you're not seeing a ton of upside from anyone else here. We look at the median, we look at the ceiling, makes it not want to take a shot on them. But now let's move over to last night's competition over on Superdraft, where I got absolutely crushed. Had about 1,700 in play, got 250 back. But thank you to Superdraft, who refunded all my losses because I had nearly 100% Jeremy Grant and 30% Jokic and 30% Plumlee. So that game just entirely crushed me, but all's forgiven because Superdraft took care of me here. So not a losing night for me over on Superdraft. Break-even night because they did a great thing that they didn't have to do and refunded everything to me. So I'm bringing up the winning lineup last night for 15K. Ski Basher absolutely crushed, took first and second, and this was the winning lineup. So like I said, Kyle Anderson, not a guy that generally ends up crushing. Only 0.5% owned, went off of 62. That's right around where Oladipo went and a few other guys went. So it wouldn't have been necessary. Honestly, I think the second place line probably had the same lineup, just with someone slightly different. We're pulling it up now. Okay, he just happened to end up with Holmes in his lineup, who went up for 81. But we'll look at the top lineup. Again, Cantor was 70% owned last night. Allen was 15.8. We know what Allen did with Drummond out. He went into the game 1.5x multiplier. People going with Allen over Cantor, probably not making the optimal move, but definitely based on ownership was a great GPP move. Allen went off for a massive game here. We see he went off for 62 Superdraft points at the 1.5 multiplier, ended up at 93.75. So he was a catalyst in any winning lineup. And then Keldon Johnson, a guy who I had a ton of, but happened to have a ton of them in all lineups with Jeremy Grant and Jokic, which is why I had no shot yesterday. Went off for a big game, 1.8x multiplier. Again, the use of these multipliers on these guys that have pretty high variance in their outcomes. Keldon Johnson could have ended up with 15 total points. He could have ended up with 50. He happened to end up with 50. The double-double bonus, 1.5 points at a 1.8x multiplier, ends up being 4. So the targeting guys with 10 rebound and 10-point upside, double upside is always advantageous at bigger multipliers because you're kind of getting double counted. An extra board is 1.3 points plus the 1.5 point double bonus times 1.8x. So offers you a ton of upside. We look at the rest of his lineup. He did have one bomb in there with Giannis because of the blowout at a 1x multiplier. That's the problem with the 1x multipliers, is if they don't put up a great game, you're just getting stuck with 34 points there. So their floors at a smaller multiplier are generally lower. We had Markkanen go off for a big game. Barnes go off for a pretty good game, 45 points, ended up being huge at 1% ownership to go for 72.8 points. So Chris Paul, one of the guys that we didn't expect to do as much with Booker in the lineup, and he was struggling early on in the game and went on a tear later on, 34 real life points. He could have gone for 100 points here. One more assist, one more rebound. He gets the triple-double bonus, and he ends up close to 100 points there, a 1.4x multiplier, because each of those are worth 1.4 times as much. Very clearly multiplier. But yeah, this is kind of the lineup, and if you have a guy that came in at high ownership early on in the night, later on in the night, you can always swap a chalky guy. Like tonight, Jeremy Grant's going to be chalky. You can swap over to a guy like Mason Plumlee and get yourself a little advantage if you have to play some catch up. So that's just kind of Superdraft strategy. Might have gone on a little bit longer than I should have, but that's basically it. If you guys have anything you want to see, you can let us know. Drop a link on Twitter, drop something in chat during Grinders Live today that I will be on, and you can let me know anything you want to see added to this show in the future, any articles you want to see, anything that you really want to see. We should be getting more and more content up as the weeks go along. Again, big Super Bowl competition. I'm sure we'll have some content up for that, a breakdown of the entire process of how to play the single game series over on Superdraft. You know what? Real quickly, I'm just going to go open up the format for the Superdraft Super Bowl contest, the big game, Tampa Bay versus Kansas City. Not going to go too much into things, but you have the champion slot, which gets you 50% extra points on it, and then 4 flexes. So we look at the champion spot. Mahomes is a 1x multiplier. In the champion spot, he's 1.5x, but then you got guys later down who have much bigger multipliers. So Hardman, throwing him in the champion spot, there's a chance he only ends up with 4 points. There's a chance he ends up with an 80-yard touchdown, which this is a little bit of a mix between FanDuel and DraftKings format. So for scoring, so if he gets an 80-yard touchdown, that is what I think 18 points almost. So 18 points at a 3x multiplier ends up being 54, 64, whatever it is. And guys like Williams, if he ends up for a touchdown, that touchdown in the champion spot is now worth 18 points. Scotty Miller, same thing. Kickers can be worth a lot and be worth it in the champion spot. Gronk, a 3.4x multiplier. Again, touchdowns become so valuable at these higher multiplier spots where you can end up with a huge game from one guy, basically just based on one run, one catch for 50 yards and a touchdown. So if you're playing in the competition, something to keep in mind is all these guys here have the potential for a big game. So just something to think about. If you're going to play in the big game competition here, any one of the big ones, which we look in the lobby, again, there's that $4,000 one, maybe a bit out of people's price range, but something that I'm planning on maxing out. We have the $20 red zone, 20K to first. There's going to be 5,500 max entries. You can 150 max it. If that's a lot of your price range, $4 one that you can 150 max. If that's out of your price range, guess what? They have a $1 one that should be able to be maxed out at 150 that is likely large inside. I can't see right here. It's not on the main screen, but you can find it under the NFL tab right up here. Again, $525 entry competition. So something for everyone, whatever you want to play. Again, play whoever you want. If you just want to root for McCole Hardman, you throw him in there in the champion spot, goes off for a big game. Hooray, you win money. Doesn't go off for a big game. You know what? You had fun watching it. But that's basically what we got here. We'll be back again tomorrow with maybe this video, maybe an article, maybe something new. So be on the lookout for new Superdraft content over on Rotogrinders. It's been fun. Good luck on all your NBA games. Hope I was helpful. We're out of here. See you, kids.